Welcome to Funnel This, the podcast where fintech marketers and founders learn what really works when it comes to brand building and driving demand. It's hosted by me, Sally Baker. I'm the founder of fintech marketing agency Wondrous. Follow the podcast on LinkedIn and Instagram. Just search Funnel This. Welcome to today's episode of Funnel This, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Toni Gregory, who is brand and content lead at OpenPayd, and she's here to talk to us today about marketing in a regulated environment and how to stay creative whilst being compliant. But before we get into that, would you be able to give us just a brief introduction to your background and experience in the industry?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's really great to be on today. So I've been a marketer for well over a decade now, but moved into the fintech sector about 5 years ago. And I was the head of content at fintech GoCardless.
Yeah.
And now, as you said, the brand and content lead over at OpenPayd, which is a UK headquartered fintech that considers itself to be rail agnostic. So bringing together traditional payments alongside blockchain.
Fabulous. What a great introduction. Thank you. So sort of getting into the topic then, starting quite broadly, what would you say that marketing in a regulated environment sort of looks like? What does that mean?
So I think the main difference is that a lot of best practices and ideals are actually the essentials when you're working in a regulated environment. So you have to follow really strict compliance and legal guidelines across everything that you do and have a much more formalized approach with legal teams baked into your stakeholder process rather than being an afterthought or a consideration.
Mm-hmm. So I guess thinking about a non-regulated industry, and it sounds like you've got experience of doing that too, like what type of things are you thinking about now in financial services that you haven't had to think about before, perhaps?
Well, I think in financial services, the regulator, the FCA, it's very well known regardless of if you're someone who works in the industry or not, or if you're just a normal member of the public. So there's that sense of when it comes to money and anything financial, it's much more personal. People have a much stronger emotional tie and much greater awareness. And so you have a different level of accountability, both to your own business, but also in the broader sense of how you represent the industry, because you don't want to ever be seen as that bad player that gives a lot of other credible businesses a bad reputation.
Yeah, I guess, you know, as you've said, people are obviously very aware of what's happening with their money. And, you know, a lot of industries, perhaps people are used to being careful with their data, but there's that extra level when you're talking about money as well, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think especially now more than ever, I think even businesses on the business side, we're at a place where people are very mindful of budgets, bottom lines. And I think that applies to every single supplier or payment provider. There's that sense of, how do I feel about them? Do I trust them? Yeah. And so you just have to really bring all of those things front of mind when you're thinking about your campaigns.
Yeah, absolutely. And trust is obviously key, as you've mentioned, isn't it, for anything to do with money? So would you say that, I mean, I've written down here, do you see compliance as a creative constraint rather than a blocker? But I think I'm guessing that you're going to say I don't see it as a blocker, but I suppose what I want to know more is, do you think there's a certain mindset that you have to have when you're approaching marketing?
Yeah, I think if I viewed it as a blocker, when you work in financial services that offers blockchain, serves digital asset companies and iGaming, if I thought it was a blocker, I would get nothing done.
Yes,
I'd sit at my desk paralyzed in fear every day. I actually don't even feel it's a creative constraint.
Okay.
I think if you're a good marketer, you have to be adaptable. And that applies across the board because the platforms and channels we use are constantly evolving. The technology that we need to embrace and upskill on right now, AI, it's a big topic and it affects our day-to-day way of working. And I think it applies to the industries we work in, that you have to be malleable and be creative at the core of what you're doing. A lot of people that I know that work across marketing have some form of creative background or interest, whether it's design, photography, writing. And I think those are skills that really you should be bringing to the core, no matter what your industry is. And I think too often we think of the legal element first and see it as a complete hand tie, when actually we should be thinking creative first and then peeling things back layer by layer until it is then something that works within the guardrails of compliance and regulation.
So would you say that there are would you personally have particular systems or frameworks that you, when you're starting to think about a project, that you would always approach it in a certain way to make sure that, as you say, you're thinking creative first, but that it's going to sit within what's going to be comfortable for the business?
I think that I'm a big believer in processing, project tracking, and with any campaign, there's key milestones and there's key stakeholders. And I know if I've reached a certain point, I have to then share it with legal team.
Yes.
And it has to work. But for me, I have a history. I used to do a lot of copywriting. And so for me, I love that big brainstorming initial process. And I think bigger and more ridiculous, and then sort of get rid of the bad ideas, because there'll be a lot of them. But I think that initial brainstorming process, I personally feel that the best campaigns that I've worked on have been a real amalgamation of people from across marketing, across brand design in a room, throwing things out there. And then you will start to see a pattern. You'll think of it in relation to your ICPs and you'll whittle it down and ideate on it. And I think that's such an important starting process. And from there you go, okay, well, what of this wording actually wouldn't we put out there publicly? But what are the alternatives? And how would we frame that if we then thought in the situation of there might be T's and C's directly attached to this? How does it work? How does the copy flow? And so I think creative first always, but it has to be no more than, I think, peeling back like 5 layers.
Yes.
And treat legal as inherently baked in stakeholders. Don't think of, oh, I've got to get it through them. You want them to be excited. You want them to be on board with it. So bring them in the process, maybe a little bit earlier, at the when you're in the final ideation stages of things, so they can feel that they are with you on that journey and they're part of the win.
I think there's a couple of really great points in there to pick up on. You said that, you really have to think creative first and almost brainstorm and then peel it back, which I think is a really interesting way to look at it, because, of course, I guess if you're starting too narrow, then you've got nowhere to go, have you? So that makes absolute perfect sense.
I think as well, it's even if you're working in an unregulated industry, we've all had these moments of big ideas and then reality sinks in and it's like, actually, that's going to cost 5 times our budget. It's the same sort of process as think big.
Yeah.
Be excited about it, really get involved in it, and then slowly let reality sink in. And I think that applies across all industries, and we can get a little too fixated on legal being that extra thing, but actually it's just one more layer.
Yeah. And the legal point, I guess in marketing, everyone says, you've got to be really close to sales. But I guess in a regulated environment, it's also really important to have a really great relationship with the legal and compliance team, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think you have to remember that you're working collaboratively. You want the same goal of the business to do well, things to be launched, to be making your business desirable and having new customers. Legal aren't against you on that, but I think they're the people who have to be much more on the front line for hard questions.
Yes.
So if you aren't bringing them in and giving them that visibility and that information, you're putting them in an uncomfortable situation later down the line. And that's where you get those really sort of tense relationships, or it starts to fracture. So I think treat them like they're on your side, and they will be. And I was very fortunate that at GoCardless, we had an amazing legal team who actually put together a marketing legal playbook for us, going through all the different types of campaigns and outputs that we might be thinking of. And it was, here's guardrails, here's the information to help you up front, because we're not trying to go for a gotcha moment later down the line. So I think that we're very much on your side, and it goes both ways.
Yeah. And absolutely, like you said, the sooner you can bring them in and help them understand what the goal is, then that's just going to make things easier, isn't it? I guess surprise sort of creates friction, and absolutely in financial services, we're trying to, for the customer, kind of eradicate that friction. So you need to do that internally as well, don't you?
Yeah, no one wants to be that person that looks like a deer in the headlights in the meeting room. You don't want to make anyone feel that way. So just treat them as sort of you would want to be treated in that situation.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to thinking about your brand voice, I suppose, have you got any tips for people on how you might go about doing that when certain languages off limits?
For me, the way I think of brand is you should always have 3 core components that are present at all times. So these can be built up of various things, whether it's your colors, your logo, a tagline, your typography. But those 3 core things that you've selected should be present everywhere, regardless of the campaign. And I think those are the things that you're using to build up the longevity, the brand equity, whereas campaigns can often be much more of a moment in time. So I always think it's important to remember that, so you're not using any language that could damage the integrity over time for a quick win. I think you sometimes have to think of the longer picture of, you might not be able to use a certain word or phrase, but actually if it's in keeping to a tone of voice you've been building up for the past 5 years, why would you want to damage that or suddenly throw people off and not make it feel like it's recognizable just for the space of a couple of months and what feels like a shorter term win for you?
Yeah. I mean, credibility sort of builds trust, doesn't it? And that consistency over time is absolutely key. So where would you say that you, I mean, I know you've clearly said that it's creative first, but do you find that storytelling, it's obviously something that's key in any industry, but is storytelling a way that you can also be creative?
Absolutely. And I think it's so important that you keep your customer, your audience, whoever you're targeting, front of mind at all times. And my personal preference when I'm working on campaigns is to focus more on the pain point or challenge that they are facing. It's not necessarily about what you are offering and why you're so great. It's what is their issue and why might you have something that can help them. And I think that often it's, you need to bring people on a bit of a journey with you and connect to actually that more emotional side. And people might think, fintech, B2B, what's an emotional side in decision making? But we've all had those moments of being sat at our laptop and wanting to tear your hair out over something, or thinking there has to be a better way of managing this. There's frustration, there's time not well spent. And you can tap into those emotions, whether it's through the language you use or the visuals you use. And I think it's really important to keep that at the heart of things. And I also think a lot of people, one thing that is more complicated in regulated industries is you have to be able to completely back up anything you say with a citable proof point, a source. You can't always just imply things like this will make your life better, because it might not. And it can't be viewed as potentially misleading in any way. So I think it's very important to have storytelling, but even though I started this by saying creative first, the numbers, the data, if you have anything that you can weave in there that will really support you and enable you to say bolder things, find those first and find them as part of the creative process. I've had it before that I've wanted to sort of tell people that a certain product or solution will improve things for them, and I've known that that's something I want to say. I've then gone and found my proof point. I've then said, can I back this up? And if I can't, you can't use it.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned there at the start that obviously it's so important to understand what the customer's problem is and to be able to use that in telling your story. And I guess from the point of view of, like you said about making claims, you have to be able to back them up. But putting yourself in the customer's shoes and explaining, we understand that your problems are X, Y, Z, I guess is easier sort of language to be able to say more openly, and then follow that up with the substantiated claim that you've then found.
Yes, it's interesting. There's a LinkedIn, I believe he's a copywriter, and he has a page that is called Forked by Feedback, and it gives examples of where you can tell often in regulated industries there was an idea, there was a concept of wanting to address a pain point or do some storytelling, but it has been so overly scrutinized and gone so far into erring on the side of caution that actually it just reads a bit cold.
Yeah.
Or it reads very stiff and you think, well, I don't relate to that. Possibly not great grammar in there either. And I think we can overthink just how cautious we have to be sometimes. And yes, you're still approaching a very human audience, regardless of being in a regulated industry.
Yeah, and people just want to know when they see sort of any copy, they just want to be able to see themselves in that problem, don't they? And you get me, I can see myself. That's what I experience. And again, that's going to help to build that trust, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Do you find that there are any sort of different content types that tend to work better in a regulated industry?
At the moment, we're in, I believe, what's sort of coined a zero-click era. So people now, a lot of the time, we're not clicking. If we're searching for something online, we're not directly clicking on it. We're reading it because there's AI summaries.
Yes.
And we can see it right there. We don't need to go through a website or through more of a content journey. So it's really important that you don't limit yourself. I think you have to think of, I need multiple touch points, multiple formats, and you have to be making sure that you're very front of mind. So someone will see you multiple times.
Or maybe multiple people in an organisation will see you in different places.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's, you want to sort of be slowly getting inside people's consciousness so they think of you when they actually do eventually click on something. The one medium that I'm slightly more cautious about, and I think it's more because I haven't seen great sort of proof points either way, is a lot of video related platforms now. So thinking of YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, they all have the functionality where people can stitch your videos and add their own commentary. And that I think I'm more cautious of if you're in a regulated industry, because it's much harder to control the narrative and to stop people putting their own possibly completely false or negative for whatever reason spin on something. And I think every business at some point has had an angry customer who has made it their mission to comment underneath every single LinkedIn post or on Google 1,000 times under the reviews. And I think if you're using a format where they can then stitch together a video of themselves talking about you, you're possibly letting yourself be open up for more scrutiny or a bit more vulnerable. But I think otherwise, try different platforms, try different mediums. Like I said, when you're in marketing, the platforms you have access to now are constantly evolving. And I don't think there's any one singular place people are finding us. If you are really going down the data-driven route to back up your point and the campaign or what you want to say, I do still believe there's a place for owning your own data, doing your own research, having it on your website. I don't know that everyone has time to read a white paper. Yeah, I think we're in a bit of a time poor sort of society right now. Everyone's rushing, everyone's got things to do. But you can turn that into an infographic. Of course. Make it more digestible. It doesn't mean that you have to not include data or more meaty pieces of information.
Yeah, and like you say, although a white paper can be such a huge thing to delve into as a reader, absolutely, there's so many different ways that you can use that, isn't there? Whether it's an infographic or a series of social posts, pull out clips, stats, etc. It just, as a content person, I imagine that sort of makes you like having one big piece. that you can come back to time and
Yes.
time again.
Yes, I had a manager many years ago describe reports and white papers like roast chickens, and you want to have one that's fully cooked and you can be slowly carving it up over time and creating lots of different things from one source.
Yes. When it comes to sort of measuring success, and you've just touched on sort of data and different places that you might want to be, what do you think good looks like for you?
The question I see everywhere, time and time again, especially when you work in brand, is, what's the platform that has the answers? How do I really prove the worth of my team or my function? Because we all know that in marketing, you do come under scrutiny inside of businesses, because it can be that it's a long game sometimes. And it's really hard to demonstrate. We're seen as the spenders. How do you then show the business you're feeding back into it? And I wish there was a solid answer I could share. The way I think of it, there's the short-term snappy things that I think we all think of, the engagement, traffic, sort of making sure you're tracking everything, but seeing in those moments of time when things are launched or updated, seeing an instant wave of response in some way. But I think the things that I also think of over time are visibility, clarity, and consistency. And it's, are you showing up? We were saying about, are you showing up time and time again? Is your brand appearing in front of your desired audience? And is it appearing in lots of different places, whether it's online, in person, at events? Is the message that you are having across everything, is it landing? Is it the same key messages time and time again, so people really know what you do and what you stand for? And I think it's that consistency of people start to build up that trust, and you become a lot more memorable and a lot more front of mind. And I always think for brand, prompted sort of recognizability and prompted awareness, you can see those evolve over time, and it is a bit of a long game.
Yes.
But I think those are good markers in the sand for knowing that your brand is out there and you aren't having a flurry of activity. And actually in 6 months' time, when the budget's run out, people forget about you again. So you need to be beating the drum constantly and showing up. So yes, I think it's balancing the immediate ROI, but very much thinking of, am I building the brand equity over time? Yeah,
and I guess there are obviously tangible results that you can measure and report back on, but also there's the intangible element, isn't there, where perhaps people are anecdotally telling you, oh, I love this piece of content that I saw, and they may not have engaged with it whatsoever to your knowledge, potentially, or I saw this person at an event and it was great. And so, yeah, those intangible moments are quite difficult to sort of feed back into the business in a meaningful way, perhaps.
Yes. So one of the areas I look after is our events arm. And there's even that over time, if you take even just 6-12 months, how many people register to attend your event? How many people then actually show up versus drop out? And then what is the feedback afterwards? Because if you are building up that brand reputation as knowledgeable, people really want to engage with you, you'll find that the number of people wanting to come to your events is increasing. You'll find that the salespeople or commercial teams at the events will be getting much easier conversations, much easier, not wins, but they won't be cold introducing themselves. Yes. People will have a sense of who you are and what you do. And I think those are things that are quite hard to measure, but they are the small markers that actually, if you track them, keep records of them, you will see the needle shifting if your brand approach is done the right way.
Yeah. And as you say, it basically is just a long game, isn't it? So if you can see those things happening, then you know you're going in the right direction.
Yeah, patience is a virtue.
Have you got any advice for somebody that's perhaps moving into a marketing position in a regulated environment for the first time?
I would say ignore other people's advice that haven't worked in regulated industries. I think it's very easy from the outside to have a negative impression or to think this is going to be really hard. I mean, firstly, it might be harder, but if you love a challenge, that shouldn't put you off.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it can't be interesting. It doesn't mean you can't think big with things and make a difference. And I think, on the surface, I'm in fintech, but fintech financial services, there's a lot of different forms of businesses and what falls under that. Some are a little less exciting than others, but I think it's really hard to know the culture within a business, and that makes a big difference. So I wouldn't limit yourself to what your perception is of it until you're actually in there and working on it. And I would say that just because there are guardrails, it doesn't mean that everything is a hard no. I mean, I think a bit like going and playing, bowling, where you have sort of you can put the gutters up at the side. Yeah. Just view it like that you go, okay, I know where my limits are, but it doesn't mean I can't still have a win in there.
Yeah. I guess sometimes having those guardrails in place can, you need to look at it in a positive way. This means I know exactly what I can do and exactly what I can't do.
And I think it sometimes does make you think outside the box a bit more, because you have to challenge yourself, and you might not be able to move at the same speed or agility as you can in non-regulated industries, but you can still create really great things and build up a brand and have an impact. And it's still really exciting if you want it to be.
Yeah, I guess going in with your eyes open. I think that would be sort of from when I moved into financial services, it's definitely that speed. Things just don't happen quite as quickly as perhaps you might be used to in another industry. But nonetheless, it can still be exciting.
Well, I think when I first was telling people I was going to go work at GoCardless, and people go sort of look it up online and go, direct debit? It doesn't sound particularly exciting from the outside. And then you go, oh yeah, there's lots of regulators and things. But actually, it was a great environment, created lots of really interesting campaigns, and it made me push myself in a way that I hadn't expected.
Yeah, and I think it is really exciting for small businesses. It's a huge opportunity for them, isn't it?
Yes.
To get paid, which is ultimately what they all want.
That's what everyone wants, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah,
so yes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's been an absolutely wonderful conversation and a look sort of under the lid of marketing in a regulated environment.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Funnel This. Follow the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed it, do share with someone else who might find it useful too. See you next time.